Hello, this is R Rats with Team 4545 League, analyzing the game between Truxton and BYOB 69. This was played in team event number 53 in the fourth round. And this game was submitted to me specifically by Truxton with a number of questions, which I will address. It was also nominated by Rubo in the Team 4545 website Game of the Week thread, and both offered some insight. And for those fans of the Budapest defense, or how to play against it, maybe we've got something here that's worth looking at. Now, what's the Budapest defense, you say? Well, black plays this gambit right here, e5. Okay, offering a pawn to get the knight into play and maybe trick white into a quick defeat. Okay, so knight f3. And now b6. Now, I admit I had never seen this position before. If I have, I certainly don't remember it. And here comes Truxton's first question. First off, before we show you, well, actually, I think I know. I think he took about 3 minutes on this move. But anyway, here's his first question here. When he played b6, it looked like he left himself open for a double attack. But what happens after? And we'll show you the line. Okay, here's the line Truxton gives me. Queen b4 check. Now you see the fork, okay? The queen's forking a couple pieces. And what Truxton sent me was bishop b4 check. And he says if knight d2, that black will exchange one of his attack pieces. Okay, so you have to play knight c3 here, and then it his notes continue, knight takes, queen takes, then knight e4, check. Now I just gotta get a check, so and then knight c6. And Truxton's question here is that the queen looks misplaced on a8 and trapped. Okay, so this is a relatively easy line to analyze if you're just sitting here playing a game, because most of the moves were kind of forced and there weren't too many branches of the trees of analysis. So let's think about this position for a second. White is ahead in material. He's got an exchange and a pawn advantage, but that queen is trapped, and it can't get out. Now it's not clear right at the moment exactly how black is going to win that queen, but who knows how long it's going to take. But eventually, there's a good chance that queen's going to be lost, and for me to sit here and try to prove what's happening would be pointless to this video. We're mortals. We're not on the high-level grandmaster skill, and we're not silicon beasts that can solve something like this in an instant. So if you see this position, you're not sure what to do. Well, you don't want to burn 25 minutes of clock time working out the fact that you can get away with this, or 25 minutes of clock time only to figure out you can't get away with this. And if you look back at those of you who've seen my lesson program, lesson 001 pretty much explains it. When your opponent tries a premature attack, if you think you see a refutation, have a quick look. But if you're not sure, in light of grabbing material, a developing move is always an excellent choice. Now, if you're playing this in blitz, of course it's an excellent choice. Okay, so even though maybe white will win from this position, he might win if he just plays a developing move and gets a good game. Okay, so why go into a risk when you don't have to? This is the kind of position that you want to play in a correspondence game. Then you can sit down and spend 5, 6, 7, 8 hours analyzing this, and maybe you can finally prove that white can get away with this. Okay, so but there's a wrinkle in the armor here, or a chink in the armor. Let me just go back to the initial position. Okay, according to what Rubo says, is there's an actual gambit here, and doesn't follow what Truxton gave at all. It's to play bishop b7, And this, if black is playing the Budapest and he's playing this line and he played b6, chances are he knows this line and he knows it well. And Truxton would have walked right into it had he played it. And this is supposed to be a better line. And the moves that Rubo gives are check, or, well, you take care. Okay, then bishop b4 check, and once again white has to go here, and then the key move is knight c6 in this position. Now the queen is very close to being trapped, and for instance, if queen a6, this is what Rubo sends, the winning strategy is to, I think, just play knight c5 here, and the queen is lost because now you have a6. So I was kind of playing around with a little bit on my own, and without looking at Rubo's source, he mentions Alterman Part 3. I'm assuming that's a video series. Truxton can look at that and do a little research. I'm sure he can find this. But I was playing with this just a little bit. Since knight c5 seems to be the key move to trap the queen, what if white just plays bishop e3? And again, it gets very, very, very complicated. After knight takes c3, white pretty much has to play a3, and black has just a ton of different candidate moves he can try. He can try knight a5, he can try rook b8, he can do a lot of things here, and I'm not even going to pretend to try to solve this position here, because probably it's already been solved by Grandmaster Alterman, and there's a resource there for everybody to look up and find the truth here. Okay, so the moral of the story is that let's go back to the initial position. If you're playing a blitz game and this gets offered to you, well, even though it apparently is a book trap, if you're playing a blitz or a bullet game, and you think that your opponent's blundered, go ahead and try it. The worst that's going to happen is you'll find out the refutation. Okay, so that's impulse moves. But if you're playing a standard game, then do take a look. I do recommend that. Take a look. You never know. Maybe he did blunder. You don't want to just assume he's got something prepared. But if you're not sure of the complications, then a developing move, as I say, is always a fine choice. Okay, so let's look at the clock. 45:57, and he took about just over 3 minutes. So let's back up for just a second, and it looks like black took 1 minute and 45 seconds on his move, so maybe he didn't want to show it was prepared. But instead, what Truxton played was knight bd2, and that's a developing move. And by putting it on d2, he stops the checks and lessens any pins on the knight if it was on c3. So I'm pulling up Truxton's notes here. He left me quite a few. So let's see. So it continues. So in the game, I wasn't sure if my queen would be punished on a8, so I went for a different plan. I decided knight bd2 to keep his dark bishop off the a7 g1 diagonal. Okay. Here's the a7 g1 diagonal. How does knight bd2 keep his dark bishop off that? Well, I'll figure that out in a second. Okay. Which lets me play g3 and bishop g2. My question is if you think g3 and bishop g2 is an improvement in the position compared to e3 and bishop e2 lines. Well, that's a good question. Since I really don't know the e3 and bishop e2 lines, it's hard for me to answer. However, I can give you a great answer just in generality before I address this thing. Because I still don't see exactly how this keeps him off the diagonal. Because if you're playing, if he plays bishop c5 here, don't you have to play e3? But anyway, oh wait, no, he can't play bishop c5. You take his knight. Yeah, that's how it keeps him off. Okay, sorry. So black has to deal with that. Okay, so back to your question with which one's better. Well, let me say this, and here's what I wanted to say, the best way to answer this. Both book, or theory as they call it, over 99% of it is nothing more than published games, usually by players of 2200 strength and above. The vast majority is even probably above 2400 strength. So there's a great assumption that what these players have played are the correct moves. That's not always the case, because the professional grandmaster will study the games of his opponent and look for some new idea, some mistake, some trick, whatever. And that's what they've been doing for years. Back in the 1960s, the United States of America had a player in the World's Correspondence Championship finals by the name of Hans Berliner, and he had to play black against this fellow from Russia by the name of Yakov Estrin. And Estrin was supposedly the world's leading authority on the two knights defense, and he'd written a book about it. Well, Berliner had a copy of that book, and he pored over it, and he found a mistake in Estrin's analysis. And he steered Estrin right into that line in their game, and he uncorked his novelty and beat him. It was that simple. So anytime you're writing theory, or you play a new move, I don't know where the novelty, where a TN comes in. That's the first. TN stands for theoretical novelty. That's the first time a move is played. It's up to the future to decide how good that move is. Oftentimes, an annotator will say, "Well, wow, look at this. This casts some serious doubt on all the major ideas here. It just stops everything the other guy was doing cold. This is a great move." And then maybe the annotator says nothing, and somebody else takes a look and finds out that it's not so good, and they prepare an improvement. And maybe they publish it, maybe they save it and play it themselves. Myself, I've had games where I've played TNs that didn't work out well, and then in correspondence chess, and then I had somebody else trying to lead me into the same game again. But this time I had something prepared, and I took care of business. Anyway, and I'll share that story eventually on video one day, not today. Okay, so coming back to his question, is it improvement? Well, that's up to the books to say it is, and it may very well be, but it needs more testing, and that's a common thing you see in books that actually go beyond just republishing moves that masters play. Good authors will come out and say this move needs testing. It seems unclear to me. I can't figure it out. Okay, so let's move on with the game, and then let me peek at his notes again, make sure I don't miss anything. Okay. Usually when black gets that kind of pressure against f2 with his knight on g4 and his bishop on c5, white is forced to play e3 and b2. Well, the difference is the knight's on e4. Does black intend on a gambit? Well, since he's down a pawn, he's playing a gambit. Usually black plays knight g4, knight c6 to win back the e5 pawn. With the knight on e4, how does he win back the e5 pawn? Is this a gambit I don't know? Well, apparently it is a gambit you don't know, and it's also a gambit I don't know, and according to Rubo in the 45-45 League Game of the Week thread, it is a gambit, unlike knight g4. So we've got our answer that it is a gambit, and we'll pretty much have the answer that it's a gambit that Truxton and I don't know. So, winning back the pawn, when you play a gambit, winning back the pawn is not the objective. Getting something for the pawn is the objective. Some kind of play that can last for the whole game, just a steady initiative, and then eventually the idea is you collect the pawn or collect another pawn or something else, and don't even worry about the gambit pawn. And in this case, the white pawn on e5 has captured the gambit pawn. We don't have to win that pawn. We can win another one, and then that e5 pawn is a double pawn, and maybe we can win it later and then be a pawn ahead. So, anyway, his next thing, question. I think these questions I have raised are interesting and worth checking out. I thank you for your time and hope you enjoy the analysis. And then, anyway, there's a couple more notes that Rubo covers. So, unless black can refute what white is doing here, trying to get Fianchettoed and castled and keeping the bishop out of c5, then it could be a very good plan. Okay, so now here black is purely playing a gambit. He's saying, if you take my pawn, I will develop my queen. So black clearly has no intention of trying to regain his pawn. He's going to play a pawn down, but he's going to have whatever play he can get. Okay, so we're just moving forward. And now that the knight is no longer pinned on d2, black feels he needs to deal with it, makes an exchange. But I think the exchange actually helps white a bit. Both exchanges do, because it's getting down to position where white's got his pieces developed and black has no threats. I mean, that king position, that whole entire king side of white's, just circle them, is rock solid. Black has no play against it. Okay, the bishop's pointing there, but nothing else. Black's queen knight and queen rook are stuck at home, and black has castled or hasn't castled yet, and black's queen isn't out yet. So maybe from this position alone we can answer his question: is this a good strategy against the gambit? And just based on this, I'd have to say at this point, yes, absolutely. White has a clear advantage here. Black's going to have to go back to the drawing board and attempt to solve 5 knight bd2. And there may be analysis on it already. I don't know. That's up to you guys. You're playing this gambit, not me. You guys got to work. If you don't work, you'll never become chess masters, okay? You can't expect any author to sit here and point everything out for you. You have to go to work. I don't care what kind of teacher they are. If they don't make you work, they're no good. Period. You guys got to do the work. Okay. So white's really getting his development up now. I think it's a perfect time to just go ahead and take the pawn, take the gambit pawn, and white's a clear pawn ahead with no weaknesses in it, weaknesses in his position. And b3, even though it puts the pawn on the same color as this bishop, that's all right. White's the pawn ahead, not black. White has the better game here. Period. And black still has 2 pieces that aren't developed: his queen knight and his queen rook. His gambit has failed. Okay, and this is good, just getting into a new diagonal, and white doesn't mind if black tries to win the pawn. Okay, for instance, I don't think this is sound, simply because, oh yeah, I know why. we just come back and pick up the rook. Okay. So this is a good move. Now, black's starving for development. There it comes. But now this shuts down the power of the fianchetto bishop. But anyway, black will work on that. And this is good. Now it's white who's attacking black. It's not the other way around. And why is white attacking black? Because white got developed and black didn't. Okay. And then there was a note from Rubo suggesting he thought this was better. Rook fe8, and he gave a couple of notes. He said on queen d5 check, king here, he said knight e6, and he has black taking on e6. I guess if he doesn't, what's white do? I guess he could play here, but I don't know. It seems like white shouldn't fear that too much. He'd just play something like, almost play knight d4 and get away with it. Well, no, probably not. Gonna drop e2, but he didn't give this move. Unless I'm blind, I'm not seeing what special aggressive move white has here. But Rubo was giving rook takes e6, and now he says if bishop takes e6, knight d8, getting back the piece. And black will actually have 2 pieces for the rook, but this is perfectly fine. And Rubo gives this line. He says, now if white blunders, there's a mate, which is true, but white doesn't have to blunder, right? These are fantasy lines, just to show what are we threatening. White has this nice move, just give back the exchange and stick the queen on the 7th rank, and can't go to c8 to guard the pawn, so black's just dropping another pawn, and the game is over. White will win easily. So let's see what happened. Knight e5. check. And white can afford to expose his king because black's not getting at it. White can play the aggressor here. And this is fine, just trade off pieces, and taking there is fine. Now there's a new target, c7. White's a pawn ahead, and black has weaknesses. And there's a outpost for the knight on e6. And just drive him right in. Okay. And now black's just defending. His two rooks are stuck defending a pawn. And all white has to do is get his queen and rook a little aggressively posted, and he's doing fine. Now he just stakes out a bigger share of the center. White's dominating this game now. It's a shame to trade off that good knight, but we can play the attrition war and just wear him down. I would seriously consider putting the knight on d4 and then maybe going to b5, or even sinking it on c6 and let the black knight wallow in its misery. It doesn't really have squares. Where's it going to get active? If it goes to h7, doesn't have a future unless it can find a way to f6, but the queen has to get out of the way, then to d7, then finally to c5. You know, I'd play knight d4 here. But this is okay too. It does give black e5, but how's he going to occupy it with his knight? Well, he isn't. Well, maybe he could. Knight d7, but that just drops the pawn. So he's not getting there. He can put a queen there, but anyway. Well, there, white has the pawn. He didn't want it. And, you know, white's just crushing. He's still a pawn ahead. e4 is hanging, but ouch. Yeah, it's just a tough game for black. He's down two pawns and didn't have anything to show for his gambit. So I think it was a great game by Truxton, and it's an interesting variation that a lot of people saw for the first time, including yours truly, and the player with the white pieces. And for those that like the Budapest defense, you need to know this line, apparently, because you could fall into the trap yourself. All right, thank everybody for their time. Great game, Truxton, and I'll be making another video for everybody very soon. Got them backed up in the queue. They'll be here. Bye now.